The world does not run on ideas. It does not run on hope. It runs on friction and the grease that kills it. In the year 1859, a man named Edwin Drake poked a hole in the dirt of Titusville, Pennsylvania. He wasn't looking for water. He was looking for the black soul of the earth. What came bubbling up wasn't just crude. It was the raw, unrefined power of the coming century. But Drake was a dreamer, and dreamers die broke. The man who would truly own the light didn't own a drill. He owned a ledger. John Davison Rockefeller, a name that sounds like the closing of a vault door, a name that would eventually command 2% of the entire global economy. Imagine that, one man holding the keys to the sun. He didn't start with millions. He started with turkeys. At age 6, while other children were playing in the dirt, John was raising birds and lending the profits to neighbors at 7% interest. He wasn't a boy, he was a bank in a wool coat. He understood the fundamental truth of the machine. Money is a liquid, and if you control the pipes, you control the flow. By the time he was 16, he was a bookkeeper in Cleveland, earning 50 cents a day. He didn't spend it. He tracked it. Every penny, every half-cent recorded in a small red book he called Ledger A to Rockefeller. Waste was not just a mistake. It was a sin against the divine order of efficiency. He watched the chaos of the early oil rush with a cold, analytical disgust. Men were screaming, digging, fighting, and dying for a commodity they didn't know how to manage. It was a gold rush without the gold, just a greasy, flammable mess. Rockefeller saw the mess and saw a vacuum. He saw a world lit by whale oil, expensive, flickering, and dying out. He saw the future in kerosene, not in the digging but in the refining. The refinery was the bottleneck. The refinery was the throat. And John D. Rockefeller was about to put his hand around it. We like to believe in the free market. We like the fairy tale of the level playing field where the best man wins through honest sweat. Rockefeller knew better. He knew that competition is a polite word for war, and in war, the goal isn't to play, it's to win. This is the paradox of the American Titan. He saved the consumer by destroying the competitor. By the mid-1860s, the oil industry was a fever dream of boom and bust. Prices swung like a gallows rope. One day oil was $20 a barrel, the next it was 10 cents. It was chaos. It was inefficient. And Rockefeller hated inefficiency more than he feared God. He didn't want a piece of the pie. He wanted the bakery, the wheat fields, and the oven. He realized that if he could refine oil more cheaply than anyone else, he could starve them out. He didn't just sell kerosene, he sold certainty. While his rivals let their byproduct, the tar, the naphtha, the paraffin, run into the rivers, Rockefeller sold it. He turned the trash of the refining process into profit. He manufactured his own barrels. He built his own wagons. He owned the verticality of existence. But the paradox deepens. To achieve this total order, he had to become a monster of the shadows. He utilized the Cleveland Massacre of 1872, a blitzkrieg of business where he swallowed 22 of his 26 competitors in a matter of months. He didn't use a gun. He used a balance sheet. He would invite a rival into his office, show them his books, and show them theirs. He would prove to them with the cold finality of mathematics that they were already dead. They just hadn't stopped breathing yet. He offered them a choice: take the Standard Oil stock and survive as a limb of his body, or stay independent and be crushed into the dirt. Most took the stock. Those who didn't were erased. He lowered the price of kerosene from 58 cents to 8 cents. He put light into the homes of the poor. He fueled the Industrial Revolution. And he did it by becoming the very thing the law was designed to prevent. He became the singular, unblinking eye of the American economy. The root of this obsession wasn't found in a boardroom. It was found in the trauma of a broken home. John's father, Big Bill Rockefeller, was a traveling con man, a botanic physician who sold cancer cures out of a suitcase and lived a double life with a second family. Bill bragged that he cheated his sons to make them sharp. He would disappear for months, then return with pockets full of cash and stories made of smoke. John D. Rockefeller grew up in the shadow of a ghost. He learned early that the world is a place of instability, where the ground can vanish beneath your feet at any moment. His reaction was a lifelong crusade for stability. He became the opposite of his father. Where Bill was loud, John was silent. Where Bill was a gambler, John was a calculator. Where Bill was a drifter, John was an anchor. In 1859, while the rest of the country was tearing itself apart over the question of slavery, Rockefeller was staring at the Titusville discovery. He didn't rush to the fields. He waited. He watched the Atlantic and Great Western Railroad stretch its iron fingers toward Cleveland. He understood that oil was useless if you couldn't move it. He saw the geography of power. Cleveland had the water and the rails. It was the perfect staging ground for a conquest. In 1863, with a chemist named Samuel Andrews, he built his first refinery. He called it the Flats. It was a cathedral of iron and steam. By 1865, he bought out his partners for $72,000, a massive sum, a king's ransom for a man in his 20s. He was betting everything on the belief that the world would never go back to the dark. He married Laura Spellman, a woman as frugal and pious as he was. They lived a life of monastic discipline in a mansion of gold. He didn't drink, he didn't smoke, and he didn't boast. He simply grew. Like a redwood tree in a forest of saplings, he began to block out the sun. The origin of Standard Oil wasn't greed in the traditional sense. It was a desperate, religious need for order in a world of his father's chaos. To understand the empire, you must understand the mechanism. Standard Oil was not a company. It was a biological organism that learned how to breathe underwater. The secret weapon was the rebate. In the 1870s, the railroads were the veins of America. Rockefeller went to the railroad kings, Vanderbilt, Scott, Good, and offered them a deal they couldn't refuse. He promised them a steady, massive volume of oil every single day. In exchange, he demanded a discount, not just a small discount, but a secret drawback, a kickback where the railroad would pay Rockefeller a portion of the shipping fees paid by his competitors. Read that again. His rivals were unknowingly subsidizing his growth. Every time a competitor shipped a barrel of oil, they were putting money into Rockefeller's pocket. It was a closed loop. It was a mechanical stranglehold. When the railroads tried to fight back, he built his own pipelines. He laid 4,000 miles of iron tubing across the Appalachian landscape, bypassing the tracks entirely. He turned the earth itself into his delivery system. But the law was beginning to wake up. Ohio had rules against corporations owning property outside the state. So Rockefeller and his lawyers invented a new ghost, the trust. In 1882, they created a legal fiction where 9 trustees held the stock of dozens of different companies in trust. It was a way to be everywhere and nowhere at once. It was a shadow empire that operated above the reach of any single state. This was the birth of the modern holding company, a structure designed specifically to evade the light of public scrutiny. Inside the Broadway headquarters, the Standard Oil Trust functioned like a private government. They had their own intelligence service, their own diplomats, and their own executioners. They used predatory pricing to drive local grocery stores out of business if they dared to sell a rival's kerosene. They used espionage to track every shipment of every competitor. The mechanism was perfect. It was a machine that converted the sweat of 100,000 employees into a river of gold that flowed toward one man. But every machine has a breaking point. The very efficiency that built the empire became its indictment. By the turn of the century, the name Rockefeller was synonymous with the Octopus. Ida Tarbell, a journalist whose father had been crushed by Standard Oil, spent years peeling back the layers of the trust. Her 1904 exposé didn't just provide facts, it provided a soul to the public's rage. She showed the world the Standard Oil way, the bribery, the intimidation, the cold-blooded destruction of the independent man. President Theodore Roosevelt, the trust buster, saw the political wind changing. In 1911, the Supreme Court finally swung the hammer. They declared Standard Oil an unreasonable monopoly and ordered it broken into 34 separate pieces. The empire was dead, or so they thought. Here is the final dark irony of the Rockefeller story. The breakup made him the richest man in human history. When the trust was shattered, the individual pieces, companies we now know as Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, and Amoco, became more valuable than the whole. As the automobile age exploded, the demand for gasoline turned these baby standards into titans. Rockefeller's net worth soared to $900 million. Adjusted for the size of the economy, it was nearly $1 trillion. He had won. Even in defeat, he had won. In his final years, he retreated into a new role, the world's greatest philanthropist. He gave away $530 million. He founded the University of Chicago. He created the Rockefeller Foundation. He spent his sunset years handing out dimes to children and funding the eradication of hookworm. He tried to buy back his reputation with the same meticulous accounting he used to build it. He died at 97, a frail ghost of a man who had fundamentally altered the DNA of global capitalism. We live in the world he built. We drive on his roads, we use his fuels, and we live under the shadow of the antitrust laws he forced into existence. He proved that in the game of power, the man who controls the ledger eventually controls the world. The light in your room, the heat in your home, the very rhythm of the modern day. It all traces back to a boy with a red ledger and a cold, unwavering belief that competition is a sin, and efficiency is the only god worth serving. Standard Oil is gone, but the oil remains, and the ghost of John D. still watches the flow.